The courtroom carried a strange tension that morning, quiet but heavy, like the air before a storm. People whispered in tight clusters, glancing toward the doors every few seconds. Judge Frank Caprio noticed the restlessness, though he didn't yet know the cause. He adjusted his glasses, reviewed the case file before him, and felt a small knot form in his chest. The charges were serious, far more severe than what typically came before his bench. But what unsettled him wasn't the charge itself, it was the name attached to it. Leonard Vance. A billionaire. A man whose name appeared on skyscrapers, foundations, and political fundraisers. The kind of man who rarely showed up to court, because problems like these usually disappeared long before public eyes ever saw them. Yet today, for reasons no one could quite agree on, he was coming. A sudden shift in the murmurs made Caprio look up. The double doors opened. Vance walked in like he was arriving at his private club. His tailored suit had a shine that came from both expense and ego. His stride was slow, confident, measuring the room the way a predator measures the distance to its prey. People didn't move out of his way, he didn't give them the chance. His presence pushed through by force alone. He stopped at the defense table, placing one manicured hand on the polished wood. No lawyer accompanied him. No assistant. No entourage. Just him, standing alone because he believed alone was all he needed. Judge Caprio closed the case file carefully, almost ceremonially, before addressing him. "Mr. Vance," he said, keeping his tone steady, "you're charged with threats and intimidation against a local store owner. Are you represented by counsel today?" Vance's gaze locked with his, cold and unblinking. "I represent myself." The statement wasn't just an answer, it was a challenge. A declaration that he did not fear the space he stood in. Caprio nodded once. "Very well. I'll hear your plea." Vance leaned forward, resting both hands on the table as though claiming it. "Your Honor, let's skip the formalities. This whole thing is beneath me, and honestly, beneath you." The courtroom stiffened. The statement was bold enough to be insulting without crossing fully into open contempt. Caprio felt the eyes of every spectator turning to him, waiting to see if the man known for his kindness would break that reputation today. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Caprio asked. Vance chuckled, a low sound that carried arrogance rather than amusement. "Come on, Judge. You're a smart man. You know how this city works. There are courts, and then there are decisions that matter. This," he gestured vaguely around the room, "is small. A misunderstanding between me and someone who refused a generous offer." Caprio studied him silently. The confidence wasn't surprising, but the ease with which Vance dismissed the institution of justice itself was unsettling. "Mr. Vance," he said, "regardless of your status, the allegations against you are serious. Threatening a citizen." "That's where you're wrong," Vance cut in sharply. He stepped closer, lowering his voice but not enough to hide the contempt in it. "There are citizens, and there are people who make the city run. I'm in the second category. And if we're being honest, Judge," he tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing, "so are you." A murmur rippled like a wave through the room. Caprio didn't speak. He waited. Vance leaned in further, voice dropping into a whisper sharp enough to slice through the air. "I own half this city. And if we're being brutally honest, I own you too." The judge's breath halted, not from fear, but disbelief. The arrogance was so absolute it bordered on madness. For a moment, Caprio simply looked at him, struck silent, not because the words wounded him, but because they revealed the rot beneath Vance's polished exterior. The silence stretched. The courtroom held its breath. Finally, Caprio straightened his shoulders. His voice, when it came, was measured, calm, but edged with steel. "This court will take a short recess." He stood. "Mr. Vance," he added, "you will remain inside the building." Vance smirked as though he had forced that reaction, as though he had won something intangible. But he couldn't see what was pulsing behind the judge's eyes, the shift, the awakening of something firmer than anger. Justice. Resolve. A storm forming. As Caprio walked to his chambers, whispers surged behind him like a rising tide. People knew they had witnessed something unusual, something dangerous. But they had no idea this was only the beginning. Judge Caprio's chambers were quiet, almost oppressively so. The sunlight slanted through the tall windows, falling across the dark wood desk where papers and files were stacked meticulously. Caprio stood behind it, rubbing his temple as Vance's words echoed in his mind, "I own you." He had faced arrogance before, and even contempt. He had stared down angry parents, petty criminals, and frustrated citizens who believed their wealth or influence gave them power. But Vance was different. The audacity, the certainty in those words, the belief that money could buy not only obedience but dignity, it was breathtaking. Caprio's chest tightened as he imagined the city outside, unaware of the battle quietly taking place within the walls of its courthouse. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Judge, are you all right?" Maria, his longtime clerk, peeked in. Caprio nodded, though he was not entirely calm. "Call Mr. Kareem Doss back in. And the witnesses. And the city council's ethics reports, Maria. All of them." Her eyes widened. "All of them, Judge?" "Yes. All of them." Caprio's voice was steady, but it carried a weight that made Maria nod immediately and hurry out. He took a deep breath, letting the tension settle into focus. This was not about intimidation anymore. This was about truth, about restoring balance. When the courtroom reconvened, an almost electric silence fell over the room. Vance had returned to his chair, still smug, though there was a flicker in his eyes he had not shown before. Caprio entered, his robes flowing behind him, and the energy shifted immediately. He was no longer just a judge listening to a case, he was a force the courtroom could feel, calm but unyielding. "Court is back in session," he announced. His voice carried across the room with clarity and authority. "Mr. Kareem Doss, please approach the bench." The small shop owner walked up, his hands shaking as he held a worn cap. He had been terrified when Vance first threatened him, convinced that the billionaire could and would destroy his life. Standing now, facing the judge and the courtroom, he seemed smaller than before, but there was a quiet strength in his posture, too. "Mr. Doss," Caprio said gently, "tell the court what Mr. Vance said to you." Kareem swallowed, words trembling on his lips. He came to my shop and offered money for my building. I said no. I told him it belonged to my father before me, and it's mine now. He threatened me. He said he'd ruin me if I didn't comply. He said he owns this city, and I belong to him." A murmur swept through the courtroom, but Caprio held up his hand, silencing it. He looked at Vance with quiet intensity, almost like measuring the man's soul. Vance scoffed. "Emotional exaggerations, Your Honor. These are all lies from someone who refuses to accept a business transaction." "Sit down, Mr. Vance," Caprio commanded. And for the first time that day, Vance complied. Witnesses came forward one by one, neighboring shopkeepers, delivery drivers, even a former assistant from Vance's corporation. Each testimony revealed patterns of coercion, manipulation, and threats, illustrating that Vance's words were more than bravado, they were an operation of control and fear. Caprio listened to every account, his mind cataloging each detail. He had a reputation for mercy, for fairness, for understanding, but he also had a reputation for discernment. And now, every fact aligned like pieces of a puzzle, revealing the true shape of Vance's arrogance. Finally, the judge addressed the courtroom. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice low but thunderous in its weight, "you told this court that you own me. That you own this city. But the evidence presented before me paints a very different picture, one of intimidation, abuse, and blatant disregard for the law.